Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Vince Cable.
Well, friends, it's great to see such a great hall here. I'm not completely unfamiliar with Romsey. I have been here before. I was here for the by-election, was it 20 years ago?
Yeah.
And out of interest, how many people in the audience were in Romsey and supporting the Lib Dems when that happened? So about a third, yeah. But it was quite an important episode, and I think relevant to the discussion we're having here, because this is an area that has voted Lib Dem before, and not just in the exceptional circumstances of a by-election, but Sandra Gidley was re-elected twice. So there are people who, and she was a very good colleague, it was a great loss when she lost, but this has been a Lib Dem seat before, it can be again, and I'm pretty confident that with Craig and his team it will be. But let me just digress a little bit to my own story really. I took over the leadership of the party about 2.5 years ago. We weren't, I think, in all honesty, in great shape. We'd had 2 pretty awful elections. We were down to 12 MPs. I thought there were several potential ways back. The first was that we had to restore our local government base, and there are parts of this part of England where we've had a tradition of good local government and we needed to rebuild it. The second was to be absolutely clear and positive about the European project and Brexit, given the ambiguities we were getting from the Labour Party and the hostility from the Tories. And the third, that with our techniques, our way of campaigning had to be much more professional and getting into the business of doing social media properly. I confess for the first 18 months or so of my leadership, I began to despair. I didn't, we were doing all the right things, but absolutely nothing was happening. And we were trundling along at 7 or 8% in the opinion polls, which is actually where we had been since 2010, and nothing had really moved. And then, 9 months ago, things started to change. First of all, we had that round of local government elections, which turned out to be the best in our history, the whole history of the party. We have never had 700 plus gains of councillors, and we gained numerous councils across the country, and there are probably some of you here from the New Forest and elsewhere who came back into local government on the back of that. Then we had the European elections. Early on in the campaign, I had a group of young campaigners who came to me and said, we thought of a great slogan for this election, which I think they assumed because I was an old fogey I would turn down, which was bollocks to Brexit. But actually, I thought about it for 10 seconds. I thought, actually, that's right. It says what we want to say, and it says it without any fear of misunderstanding. And it actually worked. Some people were offended, a few. But nobody mistook where we stood, and we went from 8 to 20% of the voting public in those elections. I told my team that we'd do pretty well if we got 3 or 4 MEPs from 1, and we finished up with, I think, 16. It was personally, very satisfying, because I think the high point of my year as leadership, 2 years of leadership, was during that campaign, and I was sent off to Gibraltar to campaign for the Gibraltarians, who was very strongly anti-Brexit, much stronger than anywhere else in the UK. And we got to Malaga Airport on the way. And for the first time in my life, I was mobbed by this hen party. 30 young women dressed up as bunny rabbits. And they wanted my signature or selfies and whatever. I thought this is an amazing experience. It's been a leader worthwhile. Towards the end, one of the young women came up and said, "It's just so fantastic to meet a real celebrity." And she said, "I always look out for you when you're on the telly reading the weather forecast." Anyway, those elections went well. We went on to the by-election in Wales. I think my wife and I wondered quite why we were spending our weekends tramping around remote villages in Wales, but it worked, and we won. And there was a real sense of, not just of momentum, but of actually working with other parties. You know, we had former Conservatives, former Labour people going there campaigning for us, and we began to get a really new spirit around Unite for Remain. Well, I think the only other major thing that's happened in my life since, apart from passing on the baton to Joe Swinson, is that I took the plunge and decided to pass on my seat. I got a 10,000 majority. If there's any time to retire from it, it's when you're there and you can hand it on in good shape. And people do occasionally ask me, you know, if you're a Lib Dem MP, how do you make a seat a safe seat? And I always tell the story, which I think crystallises why this happened. I was out canvassing in the last election, and I was going into the parts of the constituency where I don't normally go. It was at the ultra-rich end. I think actually these days we appeal to every section, but we had this traditional idea that Lib Dems are sort of lower middle voters, and the ultra-rich voted Tory. But anyway, I was getting supremely confident, so I started venturing up these very long gravel drives, and went to one particular mansion where there was a 4x4 and a Lamborghini and several other cars, and went to the front door to do my canvassing routine, and there was nobody there, as I could judge. And there was nothing quite as vulgar as a letterbox to put my sorry you're out slip through. So I didn't quite know what to do. So I went to the front door and left my little leaflet, you know, sorry you're out, I called to see you, on this box that was sitting on the doorstep, and walked away and thought no more about it. And then a few days later I got this lovely letter, beautifully perfumed and high class, and it said, you know, "Dear Dr. Cable, I'm incredibly touched for the first time in my life that an MP actually appeared on my doorstep. And I was utterly overwhelmed that you chose to leave behind that beautiful bouquet of orchids." I have to tell you, I've voted Conservative all my life, but on this occasion, I switched to Liberal Democrat. So I hope, Craig, you're able to put these techniques to use. But anyway, let me say something a bit more serious about this election. It is a Brexit election, the Brexit election. That's what it was called for, because Johnson couldn't get his withdrawal agreement through Parliament, or at least get it through Parliament without substantial damage. The environment in Parliament had become utterly toxic, as you know. The Conservative Party had split. People who are English nationalists, essentially, now rule the Conservative Party, and the moderate, sensible people. And there are a lot of very moderate, sensible, good Conservatives, I mean, I worked with them for 5 years in government, were marginalised. And I just find it extraordinary, for example, that somebody like Philip Hammond, who was a colleague of mine, I mean, it was as dry as dust, actually, in many ways, a real Thatcherite, is now considered so liberal that there's no room for him in the Conservative Party. It's just quite extraordinary. Anyway, they have gone to the country on the basis of Brexit, and that's the way the election is defined. I think it's important to understand what it is about the current state of negotiation and the Brexit negotiations which is quite so problematic. I don't need to rehearse, I think, with you all the arguments about why staying in the European Union is important and why Europe matters politically, economically. I mean, you've heard these hundreds of times. But there are certain features about the Johnson deal that are highly problematic, even for a lot of Conservatives who had gone along with the idea of Brexit and sort of accepted, well, you know, we've had a referendum, it voted, we didn't like it, but we'll put up with it, the Oliver Letwins of this world. But there were several features of it which are particularly dangerous. And the most serious one, it relates exactly to Johnson's slogan, which is about getting Brexit done. Because the whole point is that it doesn't get Brexit done. Mm-hmm. It doesn't at all. It merely takes us through a door into the next stage of a very fraught and complicated process. And the reason why this happens is that under the withdrawal agreement, which deals with the budget, with the rights of European nationals, the one thing that it specifies is that there is a transition, what's called a transition, under which the rules of the European Union continue to apply until the end of next year, so the end of 2020. But the problem is, nobody has yet explained what happens if we get to the end of next year and there is no agreement on our future relationship with the European Union. And it's highly unlikely that there will be an agreement by the end of next year because Barnier, who is a very constructive guy and trying to be helpful, I think, says, well, you know, even if everything goes swimmingly, it probably takes 3 years. And if it's difficult, then it may take 7 or 8 years. But all we've got is a year to sort all this out in what is probably one of the most complex set of interrelationships in international trade. And it can't be done. And when we had the questioning of Johnson when he came back from the negotiations, I asked him actually, you know, what are you going to do about the end of the withdrawal agreement? And answer was they're none. They have no idea how they're going to deal with it. And in a way, this election is partly about fudging that question. It's to have an election before they have to confront it. And the Brexiteers, the hardliners, are assuming that in the middle of next year, we'll then be able to crash out anyway. And the ultra hard line, no agreement, no customs union, no single market, nothing, you know, we just crash out. Because, of course, from the business point of view, is the worst of all possible solutions. So we're in this no man's land, where nobody knows what is going to happen at the end of the transition. The second problem with the agreement, which wasn't the case with Theresa May's, the second big problem is in relation to the rest of the United Kingdom. Because what has happened is that a special arrangement has been carved out for Northern Ireland, which effectively separates Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. They operate under a different set of regulations and customs, and although many of these things are rather technical, it nonetheless creates a big divide within the UK. And the Scots, of course, will say, well, if Northern Ireland can stay in the single market, which is effectively what's happened, and operate a customs arrangement so that multinational companies don't have to pay taxes on their supply chains, why can't we have that in Scotland? And Johnson fell into a trap last week. You may have overheard the conversation. He was asked at a Northern Irish meeting, why should the Northern Irish accept this deal? And he said to them, well, you have the advantage of staying in the single market because having spent 2 years trying to argue that we've got to leave it. I mean, the whole thing is bizarre. But it's not just bizarre, it's dangerous because the rather tenuous links that are now holding the UK together are now being put under an enormous amount of strain. I mean, I happen to believe in the UK. I mean, when people say, "Who are you?" I don't actually say English. I say British. Because I lived in Scotland. Friends, relatives, whatever. I think most of us feel British, and yet that relationship, which has been there now for 300 years plus, is in real danger. I mean, I'm not just doing this for scaremongering's sake. It's in real danger. And the third reason why the withdrawal agreement is so dangerous is that, unlike in the May Agreement, there is no commitment to retain the standards relating to employment rights, relating to environmental standards, relating to food product safety and so on, which were there before. And it's an acceptance of the demands from the kind of extreme Brexit wing of the Conservative Party that they can completely disconnect from European standards. This is the kind of bonfire of controls, freedom, and so on. And of course, what lies behind it is their hope that they can link up with the United States. The belief that in some of those areas the Americans are not going to accept European standards, and if we're going to have a special relationship with the Trump administration, which is what really lies behind a lot of all this, we can't do it if we continue to be shackled by European regulation. So there are sort of three really very powerful reasons why the withdrawal agreement stands, in which those standards that no longer have any legal force add additional sort of grist to the Remainer argument. And that's why stopping Brexit is now so crucial. But to be clear, what I mean by stopping Brexit, it is actually a question of going back to the public and asking them. Now you know what Brexit means, and we didn't 3 years ago. Now you know what it means. There is an agreement here. This is what it's all about. Is that what you want? Is that what you voted for, or would you rather stay? And actually that's what we're fighting for, to get enough MPs into Parliament to make sure that afterwards there is a coalition of people, and it will include the Labour Party, who are willing to vote when Parliament returns to take this back to the people and have a people's vote. That's what this election is essentially about. Now, of course, it isn't just about Brexit, and there are people, Jeremy Corbyn is the most obvious one, who are trying to talk about anything but, because his party is totally divided. He represents, I think within the Labour Party, a relatively small group of hardline Brexiteers, because the revolutionary socialist idea is that the more chaos the better. I mean, that's ultimately what underlies it. So the leadership wants Brexit. Most of the Labour Party doesn't. They are very divided on the subject. They'd rather not talk about it. They'd rather talk about something else. But whether it's for them or for other reasons, we've got a whole lot of other issues coming onto the agenda which we've got to address, and they're quite legitimate. And I'll just briefly list the 3 E's. I think what we would want to talk about is education, the economy, and the environment. But of course they're all linked with the big story, because how much we have to spend on schools and colleges and our proposals for a lifelong learning account, which is something I've developed over the last couple of years. All of this hinges on money. And one of the problems with Brexit is that everybody who analyses it knows that the economy will slow, probably dramatically, but maybe even moderately. And if it slows, there's less government revenue, therefore there's less money to spend on services. So most of the things we and the public would like to see happening are conditional on stopping Brexit. But if we do stop it, there is what we call a Brexit dividend, and resources become available to invest in the educational projects which we judge to be crucial. And that links to the second E, which is the economy. The British economy is actually in pretty bad way. I mean, we're not in a massive recession, it's a relief, but the economy is stagnant. There is virtually no business investment taking place, and that matters not just for today, it matters because in the future there isn't the productivity which you need for rising living standards. You know, we're just bumping along the bottom, and if we finish up having a bad Brexit, and there is no agreement at the end of next year on the transition, then we really do go through the floor. So the economy is also linked with Brexit. And then there is the environment, which is also a European issue because for the reasons I've explained, many of the standards we've set and the objectives we're seeking to achieve are on a European level. And if we lose a common European stand on, say, global warming or plastics and the rest of it, then the whole commitment to the environment withers. But as a Green Party, and we are a Green Party, we've got to put our environmental commitments very much to the fore. But let me just say a little bit in conclusion about methods as well as principles and objectives. We will do extremely well in this election if three things happen. The first is a Remainer alliance, and we have got there. I can assure you, I started these negotiations when I was still the leader, and they're not easy because there are big egos in politics, as you know, and they're often bigger in the most hopeless seats, sadly, and people are reluctant to stand down. And you know, all credit to the Green Party, actually, that they've agreed to stand down for us in almost 50 seats. And I know how useful that is. They stood down for me in Twickenham last time around. We only had 2 seats they did it, ourselves and Richmond, but they did it. And the Green Party came out and actually campaigned for me. And I would hope they do that here. And we've done something we've never done before. We're not putting up candidates in every seat. And in the Isle of Wight, in Bristol West, in Stroud, I think 1 or 2 other places, we've agreed to stand down our candidates and get 100% behind the Green Party candidate. And we're doing the same in Wales with Plaid, and they will get behind us in Brecon and also in Montgomery. We will support them in Ynys Môn, which is, I think, Welsh for Anglesey, and several other seats. And this is actually a revolution in British politics. We've never had this kind of alliance, and it's forced upon us in a way by the first past the post voting system, but because we can't change that in the next few weeks. It's a long-term objective, but as long as we have it, we've got to be smart, and having an electoral agreement with the other Remain parties is a critical part of it. The second technique, and the reason why I'm optimistic about all this, is there will be a lot of tactical voting. And there will be unofficial encouragement to engage in tactical voting. Again, a lot of people don't like it. They say, you know, we want to vote for what we believe in. But the ugly truth is that in the first past the post system, if you do that, you finish up with more or less perpetual Tory government. And until we get a change in the voting system, people will just have to vote smartly. And that does mean tactical voting. And I don't know whether you saw the results of the Best for Britain analysis, but it shows quite clearly that without tactical voting, Johnson get back with a big majority. If 1/3 of non-conservative voters vote tactically, they don't get a majority. And if they don't get a majority, then it is wouldn't say certain, but it is quite possible that we can then go back to the country and say we've got to decide the Brexit issue through a people's vote. So that's why it matters. And finally, we've got to be smart in our own campaigning, and you've explained what's happening. In the European elections, there was an acknowledgement that of all the three major parties, we were the most professional when it came to social media. We've now got a lot of resource behind it. You may not be aware of that, but a lot of money has come in from the business community, which sees us as the voice of sanity in all of this. And it is being used to ensure that the modern ways of campaigning, we are ahead of the pack. So, in terms of our message, I think I've been quite clear. You know, we are the Remain party. We want to work with others to deliver it. Our opponents will turn around and say, well, if you vote for us, you let the other lot in. Well, we shouldn't buy that anymore. I mean, the simple truth is that you've got one completely unacceptable, English National Party, extreme, doing enormous damage to the country. On the other side, you've got a kind of diluted version of Venezuelan socialism. It's completely, most of their own MPs don't believe it. And we just have to have the confidence to say, well, a plague on both your houses. We've got something better to offer. And here we will offer it. And with your support, we'll win this seat. So, thank you.